Have you ever been in a moment where everything you thought you knew about someone completely shifted in an instant? Where a single word, a single name could silence an entire room and rewrite the story you thought you were living? Sometimes the most powerful people walk among us unrecognized, carrying histories that could shake the very foundations of our assumptions. This is the story of such a moment, when prejudice met legacy, when ignorance faced truth, and when three simple words transformed mockery into profound respect. In a world where we judge by appearances, where we make assumptions based on skin color, clothing, or the way someone speaks, we often forget that every person carries within them stories that could humble us, achievements that could inspire us, and a strength that could teach us what real courage looks like. What happens when someone you've dismissed, someone you've looked down upon, reveals themselves to be everything you never expected and more than you could ever imagine? This is not just a story about mistaken identity. It's about the moment when truth cuts through prejudice like a sword through silk, when dignity rises above hatred, and when a name spoken with quiet pride can change hearts that seemed hardened beyond repair. Get ready to witness how one woman's simple response to cruel mockery became a lesson in respect that no one in that room would ever forget. The autumn rain had turned the streets of downtown Seattle into a maze of puddles and rushing pedestrians. Sarah Blackhawk pulled her worn leather jacket tighter around her shoulders as she stepped into the gleaming lobby of Morrison and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. Her weathered boots squeaked softly against the polished marble floor, a sound that seemed to echo in the vast space filled with modern art and expensive furniture. She had dressed carefully that morning, choosing her best jeans and the jacket her grandfather had given her years ago. The leather was soft with age, decorated with traditional beadwork that told the story of her people. To her, it was armor. To others, she was about to discover it was something else entirely. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer suit, looked up from her computer screen. Her eyes traveled from Sarah's face down to her boots and back up again, her expression shifting from professional courtesy to thinly veiled disdain. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone suggesting she doubted very much that she could. "I have a meeting with Mr. Morrison at 2 o'clock, Sarah replied calmly, her voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who had faced such looks many times before. The receptionist's fingers clicked across her keyboard with unnecessary force. "Name?" "Sarah Blackhawk." The clicking stopped. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied her screen. "I don't see any appointment under that name." Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a printed email, unfolding it carefully. "Here's the confirmation. Your office requested this meeting." The receptionist barely glanced at the paper. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to wait over there while I sort this out." She gestured toward a seating area near the elevators, her tone making it clear that over there was where she believed Sarah belonged. As Sarah walked toward the designated area, she noticed other people in the lobby. 3 men in expensive suits were standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, their conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. A woman in a tailored dress was speaking quietly into her phone while checking her watch. Everyone looked like they belonged in this world of polished surfaces and quiet wealth. Sarah settled into one of the leather chairs and waited. She had learned patience from her grandmother, who used to say that patience was not passive waiting, but active strength. She would need that strength today. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Sarah watched as the receptionist helped other visitors with warm smiles and efficient service. A delivery man was directed to the service elevator. A client was immediately escorted to the elevators by a junior associate. But when Sarah approached the desk again, the same cold expression returned to the woman's face. "Excuse me, I've been waiting for 30 minutes. Could you please check on my appointment again?" "Ma'am, as I told you, there's no appointment in the system. Perhaps you're at the wrong building." Sarah kept her voice level despite the growing frustration. "This is Morrison and Associates, correct? 42nd floor." "Yes, but maybe you should try calling to reschedule. Sometimes these things get mixed up." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Sarah understood what was really being said. She was being dismissed, brushed off, treated as if her very presence was a mistake that needed to be corrected. At that moment, the elevator doors opened, and 3 people stepped out. Sarah recognized them immediately from the photos she had researched before coming here. James Morrison himself, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a $1,000 suit. Beside him was Patricia Chun, the firm's managing partner, and David Reeves, their senior litigation specialist. They were deep in conversation as they walked across the lobby, their voices carrying the authority of people accustomed to being heard and respected. Sarah stood up, smoothing down her jacket. "Mr. Morrison," she called out. All 3 lawyers stopped and turned toward her. Their expressions shifted through the same sequence she had seen on the receptionist's face. Initial politeness, then confusion, then that familiar look of judgment and dismissal. "Can we help you?" Morrison asked, his voice polite but distant. "I'm Sarah Blackhawk. We have a 2 o'clock meeting." The 3 exchanged glances. Patricia Chun stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some confusion. We don't have any meetings scheduled with." She paused, as if searching for the right words, "with anyone by that name." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced countless times throughout her life. It was the feeling of being erased, of having her existence questioned simply because she didn't fit someone's expectations. "I have the email confirmation," she said, reaching for her pocket again. "Ma'am," David Reeves interrupted, his tone patronizing, "I think what my colleagues are trying to say is that perhaps you're looking for legal aid services. This is a corporate law firm. We handle mergers and acquisitions, not—" He gestured vaguely toward her. "Not whatever kind of help you might be looking for." The receptionist had moved closer, clearly enjoying the show. Other people in the lobby had begun to notice the commotion. Sarah felt their stares like physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders. "Actually," she said, her voice still steady despite the burning in her cheeks, "I'm here about the Riverside Development Project. Your firm sent me an email requesting a consultation." Morrison laughed, a short bark of disbelief. "The Riverside Project? That's a multi-million-dollar development deal. I think you must be confused about something." "Very confused," Chin added, her lips curving into what might have been meant as a sympathetic smile, but came across as condescending. "Perhaps you received someone else's email by mistake?" Sarah looked around the lobby at all the watching faces. The delivery man had paused in his work to stare. The woman with the phone had ended her call and was openly observing the scene. The 3 men by the windows had turned away from their conversation to watch what was unfolding. She could feel the weight of their assumptions, the collective judgment that she didn't belong in this place, among these people, in this conversation about million-dollar deals and corporate law. She could see in their faces what they were thinking. Here was someone who had wandered into the wrong world, someone who didn't understand her place. The receptionist, emboldened by her superior's response, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now. This is a place of business, and you're causing a disruption." Sarah stood very still for a moment, looking from face to face. These people had made their decision about who she was based on her appearance, her clothing, the color of her skin. They had decided what she was capable of, what she deserved, what kind of help she might need. "You want to know who I am?" Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the marble lobby. "Ma'am, we really don't have time for this," Reeves said with visible irritation. But Sarah wasn't backing down. Not this time. Not when she had come so far and worked so hard to get to this moment. She looked directly at Morrison, then at Chun, then at Reeves. "You asked who I am," she repeated, her voice growing stronger. "You want to know why I'm here? Why I have a meeting about your Riverside Development Project." The lobby had grown quiet. Even the sounds from the street seemed muted, as if the building itself were holding its breath. "The Riverside Development Project," Sarah continued, "is being built on land that belonged to my people for over 1,000 years. Land that was taken through broken treaties and false promises. Land that now, according to a recent federal court ruling, legally belongs to the Suquamish tribe." She paused, watching as understanding began to dawn on Morrison's face. "You see, gentleman and lady, Your multi-million-dollar development is being built on stolen land. And 3 weeks ago, a federal judge agreed with our legal team and issued an injunction stopping all construction until ownership can be properly determined. The color was draining from Chen's face. Reeves had gone completely still. Morrison was staring at Sarah with new attention, the dismissive arrogance gone from his expression. Your firm, Sarah continued, her voice calm and clear, sent me an email because you need something from me. You need my signature on documents that would allow your development to proceed. You need me to agree to certain terms that would let your clients continue their project. She reached in her jacket and pulled out not just the email, but a folder of documents. Legal documents, court papers, federal injunctions. You need me, she said simply, because I am the elected chairwoman of the Suquamish Tribal Council. And without my approval, your Riverside development project doesn't exist. The silence that followed was complete. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the shocked stares of everyone in the lobby. The receptionist had gone pale. The other observers had moved closer, drawn by the drama unfolding before them. Morrison was the first to recover his voice. Ms. Blackhawk, we had no idea. Our communications department must have what? Sarah asked. Must have assumed that a tribal chairwoman would look different? Must have expected someone who fit your idea of what authority looks like. Chun stepped forward, her professional composure cracking. Please, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We had no intention of what? Of treating me exactly the way you treat everyone who doesn't look like you belong in your world? Sarah closed the folder and held it against her chest. Gentlemen, lady, you have a choice to make. You can continue to assume that people like me don't deserve your respect, don't deserve your attention, don't deserve to be taken seriously. Or you can learn something today about the power of seeing people for who they really are, not who you think they should be. She looked around the lobby one more time, at all the faces staring back at her with new understanding, new respect, and for some, new shame. My people have a saying, judge a person by their actions, not by the clothes they wear or the color of their skin. Today, your actions have shown me exactly who you are. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Sarah walked toward them with dignified steps. As she reached the doors, she turned back one final time. Mr. Morrison, when you're ready to treat this meeting with the respect it deserves, when you're ready to see me as the leader I am rather than the stereotype you expected, you know how to reach me. The elevator doors closed, but through the glass, everyone in the lobby could see her standing tall and proud as she rose toward the upper floors, leaving behind a room full of people who had just learned a lesson they would never forget. The elevator carried Sarah to the 42nd floor in complete silence. As the doors opened, she stepped into another world entirely. Unlike the cold marble lobby below, this floor felt warmer, more personal. The walls were lined with awards, photographs of the firm's partners with various dignitaries, and impressive legal achievements spanning decades. Sarah walked slowly down the hallway, her boots now silent on the thick carpet. She had been here before, but not in the way these lawyers would understand. She had walked these halls in her mind during countless planning sessions, had imagined this moment during late-night strategy meetings with her legal team. A young associate appeared from one of the offices, a tablet in her hand, and an expression of mild confusion on her face. Excuse me, are you looking for someone? I don't think we have any appointments scheduled for this afternoon. Sarah smiled, the same calm smile that had carried her through years of negotiations with government officials, land developers, and corporate executives who had underestimated her. Actually, I think there's several people looking for me. Before the associate could respond, the sound of the elevator arriving filled the hallway. The doors opened to reveal Morrison, Chun, and Reeves, all looking considerably less composed than they had moments earlier in the lobby. Morrison's silver hair was slightly disheveled, and Chun was clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline. Ms. Blackhawk, Morrison called out, his voice carrying a tone of urgency that hadn't been there before. Please, if we could just have a moment to explain. Sarah turned to face them, her expression patient but firm. Mr. Morrison, I believe you requested a 2 o'clock meeting. It's now 2:45. The three lawyers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Reeves cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for the confusion downstairs. There seems to have been a communication breakdown between our departments." "A communication breakdown," Sarah repeated slowly. "Is that what you call treating someone like they don't belong simply because of how they look?" Chun stepped forward, her phone still in her hand. "Ms. Blackhawk, I've just been speaking with our communications director. It appears there was indeed a scheduling error, but that doesn't excuse our behavior. We should have—" "You should have done your homework," Sarah interrupted gently. "Before you scheduled a meeting with the chairwoman of a sovereign tribal nation, you might have considered learning something about who you were meeting with." Morrison nodded gravely. "You're absolutely right. That's our mistake, and I take full responsibility. Would you be willing to sit down with us now? We have a lot to discuss." Sarah studied their faces for a moment. She could see the calculation behind their eyes, the rapid mental adjustments as they recalibrated their approach. These were skilled negotiators, people accustomed to adapting quickly when circumstances changed. But something else was happening too. She could see genuine discomfort, real shame in their expressions. "Very well," she said. "But first, I think you should understand exactly what kind of mistake you've made today." She followed them into Morrison's corner office, a space that commanded a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline and Elliott Bay. The walls were covered with diplomas from prestigious universities, photographs with governors and senators, and awards from various legal organizations. Sarah took the seat offered to her across from Morrison's massive desk, but she didn't lean back or make herself comfortable. She sat with the straight-backed posture her grandmother had taught her, the bearing of someone accustomed to representing others. "Gentleman lady," she began, placing her folder on the desk, "let me tell you a story about the Riverside Development Project and how your firm came to need this meeting." Morrison opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah held up her hand. 3 years ago, your client, Riverside Holdings, purchased what they believed was a clear title to 847 acres of waterfront property north of the city. They paid $42 million for land that had been sold and resold dozens of times over the past century. They had every reason to believe they were making a sound investment. She opened her folder and pulled out a map, spreading it across Morrison's desk. The map was detailed, showing the disputed property boundaries, historical markers, and legal designations. What your client didn't know, what the previous owners didn't know, and what apparently your firm's research department didn't discover, is that this land was never legally ceded by the Suquamish tribe. The original treaty signed in 1855 contained specific language protecting certain sacred and traditional use areas. Chun was leaning forward now, her phone forgotten. "But surely, after all this time, with so many previous sales, time doesn't erase legal truth, Miss Chun, and money doesn't wash away the obligations created by federal treaties." Sarah pointed to specific markings on the map. "This entire area, including the current development site, contains burial grounds, traditional fishing areas, and ceremonial sites that were never included in any legal transfer." Reeves was taking notes furiously. "When did you first become aware of the development project?" Sarah's smile was patient, but pointed. "Mr. Reeves, we've been aware of every development project proposed in our traditional territory for the past 30 years. The question isn't when we became aware. The question is when we decided to act." She pulled another document from her folder. 2 years ago, our tribal council hired a team of federal legal specialists to research the historical claims to this land. We spent 18 months gathering evidence, consulting with historians, and documenting our case. Morrison was studying the document she had spread across his desk. "And the federal court ruling you mentioned downstairs? Judge Patricia Williams of the Federal District Court issued a preliminary injunction 3 weeks ago, stopping all construction on the Riverside project pending a full hearing on tribal land claims. Your client has invested $68 million so far. Work crews, equipment, materials, permits, marketing, pre-sales to potential buyers." Sarah's voice remained calm as she delivered what she knew was devastating news. "All of it is currently frozen by federal order." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of financial implications. Sarah watched as the three lawyers began to understand the true scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just a scheduling mix-up or a minor legal hurdle. This was a complete challenge to their client's project, potentially costing tens of millions of dollars and years of legal battles. Ms. Black Hawk, Morrison said carefully, "What exactly is the tribal council seeking?" Sarah leaned back in her chair for the first time since entering the office. "That, Mr. Morrison, is why your firm requested this meeting. You see, despite what happened downstairs, despite being treated like I was some confused woman who had wandered into the wrong building, I'm here because I believe in finding solutions that work for everyone." She reached for another document, this one clearly prepared by legal professionals. The Suquamish Tribal Council is prepared to enter into negotiations regarding the Riverside Development Project. We're not seeking to destroy your client's investment or to prevent all development of this land. Shin looked up from the notes she had been taking. What kind of negotiations? We want partnership, not conflict. We want respect, not dismissal. We want our people's history and our legal rights to be acknowledged and honored. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke. We're proposing a joint venture between Riverside Holdings and the Suquamish Tribe, a development project that honors both economic opportunity and cultural heritage. She pulled out architectural renderings and development plans that clearly represented months of professional work. Our proposal includes the establishment of a cultural center and museum as part of the development. Traditional fishing access preserved along the waterfront, burial sites protected and properly memorialized, and economic partnership that provides long-term revenue sharing with the tribe. Morrison was examining the plans with obvious interest. This is quite comprehensive. You've clearly put a lot of thought and professional expertise into this proposal. Mr. Morrison, did you think we would approach a legal matter of this magnitude without preparation? Did you assume that because I was wearing jeans and a leather jacket, I wasn't capable of sophisticated legal and business planning? The question hung in the air, forcing them to confront their own assumptions directly. Reeves shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ms. Blackhawk, I want to be very clear that our behavior downstairs was inexcusable. We made assumptions based on appearances, and that's not who we want to be as professionals or as people. And yet," Sarah said quietly, "it's exactly who you were today. It's exactly how you treated me, how your receptionist treated me, how everyone in that lobby looked at me until they learned that I had something you needed." She gathered her documents back into the folder, her movements deliberate and controlled. "The question now is whether you're capable of learning from this experience, or whether this partnership we're proposing is doomed from the start by the same prejudices you displayed today." Morrison stood up and walked to his window, looking out over the city and the waters beyond. When he turned back to face her, his expression was thoughtful and serious. "Ms. Blackhawk, you're right to question whether we can be trusted as partners. What happened today reflects poorly on our firm, on me personally, and on the legal profession. But I want you to know that this conversation has been more educational for me than most of the negotiations I've handled in 30 years of practice." He returned to his desk and sat down, leaning forward with genuine attention. "Tell me more about this partnership proposal. Help me understand what you're envisioning and what it would take to make this work for everyone involved." For the next 2 hours, Sarah walked them through every aspect of the Tribal Council's proposal. She explained the historical significance of the land, the legal precedents that supported their claim, and the economic benefits that could flow from a respectful partnership rather than a costly legal battle. As she spoke, she watched the three lawyers transform from the dismissive professionals who had confronted her in the lobby to engaged partners in a complex negotiation. They asked thoughtful questions, raised legitimate concerns, and began to sketch out the framework for what could become a groundbreaking agreement. But Sarah never forgot the lesson of the lobby. She never let them forget it either, because she understood that respect earned through necessity was different from respect given freely, and she was determined that any partnership they built would be founded on the latter rather than the former. As the afternoon light began to fade outside Morrison's windows, Sarah closed her folder and prepared to leave. She had accomplished what she came to do. The meeting had happened. The proposal had been presented, and the foundation for future negotiations had been established. "Ms. Black Hawk," Chin said as they prepared to adjourn, "I want to apologize again for how this meeting began. We clearly have a lot to learn about respectful, professional relationships." Sarah nodded, accepting the apology, but not absolving them completely. "Ms. Chun, apologies are meaningful when they lead to change behavior. The real test of whether you've learned anything today will be how you treat the next person who walks into your lobby looking different from what you expect." As she walked toward the elevator, Sarah felt the weight of the day's events settling around her. She had achieved her immediate objectives, but she also carried with her the familiar burden of having to prove her worth, her intelligence, her authority to people who should have recognized it from the beginning. The elevator doors closed behind her, and as she descended toward the lobby, she prepared herself for the final act of this complicated day. Because she knew that when those doors opened, she would once again face the people who had dismissed her, and she would have to decide how to carry herself in that moment of their recognition and her triumph. The elevator descended through the floors of Morrison and Associates, and with each passing floor, Sarah felt the weight of the afternoon's events settling into her bones. She had spent 2 hours transforming from an unwelcome intruder to a respected negotiating partner, but the journey had taken more out of her than she had expected. As the numbers above the elevator doors counted down toward the lobby, Sarah straightened her leather jacket and composed herself for what she knew would be an interesting reception. Word had a way of traveling fast in buildings like this, especially when it involved the kind of dramatic reversal that had just taken place in Morrison's office. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah stepped back in the marble lobby where her day had begun so differently. The space looked the same with its expensive furniture and modern art, but something fundamental had changed. She could feel it in the way conversations paused as she passed, in the quick glances thrown in her direction, in the sudden attention paid to her movements. The receptionist who had dismissed her hours earlier was still at her desk, but now she was watching Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and what appeared to be anxiety. Their eyes met across the lobby, and Sarah saw recognition there, along with something that might have been embarrassment or fear. Sarah approached the reception desk with the same measured pace she had used earlier, but this time she could feel the difference in the atmosphere around her. Other people in the lobby were paying attention, some openly staring, others pretending to focus on their phones while stealing glances in her direction. "Excuse me," Sarah said to the receptionist, her voice carrying easily across the quiet lobby. The young woman looked up with an expression that was completely different from the one she had worn earlier. Gone was the dismissive arrogance. In its place was careful attention and nervous respect. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" Sarah placed a business card on the polished marble counter. The card was simple but elegant, with the official seal of the Suquamish Tribal Council and her title clearly printed, Chairwoman Sarah Blackhawk. "I wanted to leave this with you," Sarah said calmly, "in case there are any questions about who I am or why I was here today." The receptionist picked up the card with hands that trembled slightly. She read it once, then again, her face growing pale as the full implications of what had happened earlier began to sink in. "Mom, I want to apologize. I had no idea who you were. You thought exactly what you were trained to think," Sarah interrupted gently. "You looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong in your world, someone who needed to be managed and dismissed rather than respected and served." Other people in the lobby had moved closer, drawn by the quiet intensity of the conversation. The 3 men in expensive suits who had been talking by the windows earlier were now openly listening. The woman who had been on her phone had ended her call and was watching with fascination. "But here's what I want you to understand," Sarah continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the lobby. "I'm not upset with you personally. You're not the problem. You're the product of a system that teaches people to judge worth by appearance, to assume authority comes only in certain packages, to believe that power and intelligence look a certain way." The receptionist was holding the business card as if it might burn her fingers. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Thank you for that apology. It takes courage to admit when we've made a mistake. Sarah leaned slightly closer to the desk, her voice becoming more intimate but still audible to the listening crowd. But I want you to think about something. Today, you learned that I am someone deserving of respect because of my title and position. But what about tomorrow? What about the next person who walks through those doors looking different from what you expect? Will they have to prove their worth to you, or will you choose to offer them dignity from the beginning? The young woman was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the implications of Sarah's question. I never thought about it that way. Most people don't, Sarah replied. We're all raised with assumptions and biases that we don't even realize we carry. The difference between wisdom and ignorance isn't whether we have these biases, it's what we do when we recognize them. An older man who had been waiting for the elevator approached them hesitantly. Sarah recognized him as one of the law firm's partners, though they hadn't been introduced. Excuse me, Ms. Blackhawk. I'm Robert Chun, Patricia's father and senior partner here. I wanted to personally apologize for what happened earlier. Word has gotten around about how you were treated, and I want you to know that this is not reflective of our firm's values. Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine distress there. Mr. Chun, I appreciate your concern, but I have to ask you something difficult. If I hadn't turned out to be someone your firm needed, someone with legal authority and economic power, would anyone be apologizing to me right now? The question struck the lobby like a physical blow. Robert Chin's face flushed, and several other people looked down at their hands or suddenly found something interesting to examine on their phones. That's not a comfortable question, is it? Sarah continued, because the honest answer is probably no. If I had just been Sarah, a woman in jeans and a leather jacket looking for legal aid or directions or any other kind of help, I would have left here feeling diminished and dismissed, and all you would have gone about your day without giving me another thought. She looked around the lobby at all the listening faces. But here's what I want you to understand. Every person who walks through those doors carries with them stories that could surprise you, experiences that could humble you, and wisdom that could teach you something you didn't know you needed to learn. The janitor might be a published poet. The delivery driver might be working on a PhD. The woman in jeans and a leather jacket might be the elected leader of a sovereign nation. A young associate who had been standing near the elevator stepped forward. Ms. Blackhawk, I was here earlier when this all happened. I want you to know that watching how you handled yourself has been one of the most educational experiences of my career. The dignity and grace you showed in the face of such disrespect, it's something I'll never forget. Sarah smiled at him, a warm expression that transformed her face. Thank you for saying that. But I want you to understand something important. I shouldn't have had to show exceptional grace or dignity to deserve basic respect. No one should. Respect should be the starting point, not something people have to earn by proving they're worthy of it. The lobby had grown quite crowded now, with people from other floors apparently having heard about what was happening and coming down to witness the conversation. Sarah found herself at the center of an impromptu gathering that felt part apology, part confession, and part lesson. I want to tell you all a story, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the space. My grandmother used to clean office buildings downtown. She worked nights when all the important people had gone home and left behind their messes for someone else to handle. She was brilliant, that woman. She spoke 4 languages, could do mathematics in her head that would stump most college graduates, and knew more about local history than most professors. She paused, letting the image settle in their minds. But to the people who occasionally encountered her during their late nights at the office, she was just the cleaning lady, someone to be ignored or, at best, acknowledged with a polite nod. They never knew that she was the woman who had organized the successful fight to get our tribe federal recognition. They never knew that she had negotiated water rights agreements that are still in effect today. They never knew that she was raising a granddaughter who would one day sit across from some of the most powerful lawyers in the city and hold her own in negotiations that would affect millions of dollars. The silence in the lobby was complete now. Even the sound from the street seemed muted, as if the building itself were holding its breath. My grandmother taught me that dignity is not something other people give you. It's something you carry within yourself, regardless of how others choose to see you. She taught me that respect is a choice we make about how to treat other human beings, not a reward we give to people who prove they deserve it. Sarah looked directly at the receptionist, then at Robert Chun, then around at all the listening faces. Today, you all learned something about assumptions and prejudice and the cost of judging people by their appearance. But the real question is what you'll do with that knowledge tomorrow and the day after that and every day for the rest of your careers. She picked up her folder and moved toward the exit, but stopped after a few steps and turned back to face them one more time. I want to leave you with one final thought. You all work in the justice system. Every day, you deal with laws and rights and fairness. But justice isn't just something that happens in courtrooms. It's something that happens in lobbies and reception areas and elevator conversations. It's something that happens every time we choose to see the full humanity in another person, regardless of what they're wearing or what they look like or whether we think they belong in our space. She walked toward the glass doors that led to the street, her boots clicking confidently against the marble floor. As she reached the exit, she heard her name called out. Ms. Blackhawk. She turned to see the receptionist standing behind her desk, the business card still in her hand. Thank you, the young woman said simply, for the lesson, for your patience, for showing me something I didn't know I needed to see. Sarah nodded, her expression softening. We all have things to learn. The brave ones are the people who are willing to listen when the lesson comes. As she pushed through the glass doors and stepped back onto the busy Seattle sidewalk, Sarah felt the weight of the day's events beginning to transform into something else. The anger and frustration were still there, but they were joined now by something that felt like hope. Because in that lobby, she had seen something that gave her faith in the possibility of change. She had seen people confront their own biases and feel genuine discomfort about what they discovered. She had seen individuals choose to listen rather than defend, to learn rather than dismiss, to grow rather than remain static in their assumptions. The autumn rain had stopped while she was inside, and the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows down the street. Sarah pulled out her phone and called her assistant back at the tribal council offices. Mary? It's Sarah. Yes, the meeting happened. It was educational, for everyone involved. She smiled as she walked toward her car. Schedule a follow-up meeting with Morrison's firm for next week. And Mary? Make sure they have my correct title on all the documents this time. Apparently, that matters to some people. As she ended the call and unlocked her car, Sarah thought about the drive home to the reservation, where she would report back to the tribal council about the day's progress. She would tell them about the legal negotiations, about the partnership proposal, about the potential for moving forward with the development project on terms that honored both economic opportunity and cultural heritage. But she would also tell them about the other conversation that had happened today, the one about respect and dignity and the choice to see people as full human beings worthy of consideration. Because that conversation, Sarah understood, might end up being the most important negotiation of all. 6 months later, Sarah Blackhawk stood in the same marble lobby of Morrison and Associates, but everything had changed. The space looked identical, with its polished floors and expensive artwork, but the atmosphere was completely different. Today, she was here for the signing of the Riverside Partnership Agreement, a groundbreaking contract that would serve as a model for tribal corporate cooperation across the country. As she entered the lobby, the receptionist immediately looked up with a genuine smile. It wasn't the same young woman from that difficult day in autumn. The receptionist, whose name Sarah had learned was Jennifer, had requested a transfer to the firm's diversity and inclusion department, where she was now working on programs to educate legal professionals about cultural sensitivity and unconscious bias. Good morning, Chairwoman Blackhawk, the new receptionist said warmly. Mr. Morrison is expecting you. Would you like me to escort you upstairs? Thank you, Maria, but I know the way, Sarah replied, appreciating the respect in the woman's tone. The firm had clearly implemented new protocols for greeting visitors, but more importantly, they seemed to have embraced a genuine cultural shift in how they approach people who walk through their doors. As Sarah waited for the elevator, she reflected on the months that had passed since her first visit. The negotiations had been complex and sometimes heated, but they had ultimately produced something remarkable. The Riverside development would proceed, but as a joint venture that honored both economic opportunity and cultural heritage. A world-class museum and cultural center would anchor the development. Traditional fishing areas would be preserved and enhanced. A percentage of all profits would fund tribal education and healthcare programs. But perhaps more significantly, the process had transformed everyone involved. Sarah had watched as Morrison, Chun, and Reeves had educated themselves about tribal history, federal Indian law, and the complex legacy of broken treaties and forced assimilation. They had attended cultural events, learned about traditional practices, and developed what appeared to be genuine respect for the Suquamish people's heritage and contemporary contributions. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and Sarah was greeted by Patricia Chun, who had become an unexpected ally, and even something approaching a friend during the long months of negotiation. "Sarah, welcome back," Chun said, embracing her warmly. "I have to tell you, I'm both excited and nervous about today. This agreement is going to change everything." "Change is good," Sarah replied, "when it moves us toward justice and mutual respect." They walked together toward the conference room, passing the offices where Sarah had spent countless hours working out the details of the partnership. The walls now displayed Native American artwork alongside the traditional legal awards and certificates. The change was subtle but meaningful, a visual reminder of the firm's expanding worldview. In the conference room, a crowd had gathered for the signing ceremony. Representatives from Riverside Holdings were there, including CEO Michael Brennan, who had initially resisted the idea of partnering with the tribe, but had eventually become one of the agreement's strongest advocates. Federal officials were present to witness the historic nature of the arrangement. Members of the tribal council had made the journey from the reservation, dressed in their finest traditional regalia. But Sarah was most interested in seeing the changes in the Morrison and Associates team. James Morrison himself had spent weeks on the reservation, learning about tribal governance and traditional ecological practices. David Reeves had hired a specialist in federal Indian law and had begun incorporating tribal perspectives into other corporate negotiations. The transformation was visible in their faces, in their body language, in the way they interacted with the tribal representatives. As Sarah took her seat at the conference table, she noticed a familiar face in the back of the room. Jennifer, the former receptionist, was there as part of the diversity and inclusion team, taking notes for what would become a case study in transformative professional practices. Morrison called the meeting to order, and as he began to speak, Sarah was struck by how different his tone was from their first encounter. 6 months ago, Morrison began, "Our firm learned a valuable lesson about assumptions, prejudice, and the cost of failing to see people for who they really are. That lesson came from Chairwoman Sarah Blackhawk, who had the patience and wisdom to teach us something we desperately needed to learn." He paused, his eyes finding Sarah's across the table. "Today, we're not just signing a business agreement. We're celebrating a transformation that has made us better lawyers, better negotiators, and better human beings." The ceremony proceeded with speeches from various officials, but Sarah found her attention drifting to the broader implications of what they were accomplishing. This partnership would bring economic development to both the tribe and the surrounding community. It would preserve important cultural sites and create educational opportunities for future generations. But perhaps most importantly, it would serve as a model for how indigenous peoples and corporate America could work together with mutual respect and shared prosperity. When it came time for Sarah to speak, she stood and looked around the room at the assembled faces. She saw tribal members who had fought for decades to have their rights recognized. She saw corporate executives who had learned to value perspectives they had never considered before. She saw lawyers who had discovered that justice was more complex and more personal than they had realized. 6 months ago, I walked into this building and was treated as if I didn't belong here. Today, I'm standing in this room as a full partner in an agreement that will affect our communities for generations to come. The difference is not just that you learned who I was. The difference is that you learned to see who I am." She gestured toward the tribal council members in their traditional regalia. "My people have always understood that true wealth comes not from what you can take from the land, but from what you can give to future generations. Today, we're creating something that honors both economic prosperity and cultural continuity. We're proving that it's possible to build bridges across differences when we start from a foundation of mutual respect." Sarah picked up her pen and signed the agreement, her signature making official a partnership that represented millions of dollars in investment, hundreds of jobs, and a new model for indigenous corporate cooperation. But she was thinking about something else entirely. After the signing ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Sarah found herself in conversation with Jennifer, the former receptionist who had been the unwitting catalyst for so much change. "MS. Black Hawk," Jennifer said, "I want you to know that working on these diversity and inclusion programs has been the most meaningful work of my career. Every day, I think about our interaction in the lobby and how it opened my eyes to things I had never considered before." "Tell me about the programs you're developing," Sarah replied, genuinely interested in how the lessons of that day have been institutionalized. Jennifer's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "We're working with law schools to develop curricula about cultural competency and unconscious bias. We're creating training programs for law firms about how to recognize and address prejudice in professional settings. And we're establishing mentorship programs to connect tribal law students with established attorneys." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That sounds like work that could have a real impact." "It already is," Jennifer said. "We've had inquiries from firms across the country who want to implement similar programs. Your story, the lesson you taught us that day, it's spreading." As the celebration continued around them, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The business deal was important, the economic opportunities were significant, and the cultural preservation was vital. But the human transformation that had grown out of that difficult day in the lobby might ultimately be the most valuable outcome of all. Later that evening, Sarah drove back to the reservation as the sun was setting over Elliott Bay. She thought about her grandmother, who had cleaned those downtown office buildings, and dreamed of a day when her granddaughter would be respected not despite her heritage, but because of the strength and wisdom it provided. The next morning, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Morrison. "Sarah, I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I wanted to share something with you. We just got a call from a tribal chairwoman in Montana whose community is facing a similar land dispute with a mining company. She asked if we would be willing to represent her tribe, and she specifically requested to work with a firm that had learned to treat indigenous leaders with proper respect." Sarah smiled, understanding the full implications of what Morrison was telling her. The transformation that had begun in his lobby was spreading, creating ripples that would affect other communities, other negotiations, other opportunities for justice, and mutual respect. "That's wonderful news, James. I'd be happy to provide a reference and to share our experiences with negotiating respectful partnerships. There's something else," Morrison continued. "The chairwoman mentioned that she had heard about our work together from her nephew, who's a law student at the University of Washington. Apparently, we've become something of a case study in his federal Indian law course." After hanging up the phone, Sarah walked outside her house and looked out over the land that her ancestors had protected for generations and that she had now helped to preserve for generations to come. The Riverside development would bring economic opportunities to her people while honoring their cultural heritage. The partnership with Morrison and Associates would serve as a model for respectful collaboration. The lessons learned in that marble lobby would continue to spread, changing hearts and minds far beyond what anyone could have imagined. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah thought, the next time someone walked into that lobby looking different from what people expected, they would be more likely to encounter respect rather than dismissal, curiosity rather than assumptions, opportunity rather than obstacles. That evening, at the monthly Tribal Council meeting, Sarah presented her report on the Riverside Partnership Agreement. As she stood before her community, sharing the details of what they had accomplished. She thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. This partnership represents more than economic development, she told the council members. It represents the power of maintaining our dignity in the face of disrespect, the importance of education over anger, and the possibility of transformation when we choose to build bridges rather than walls. Elder Robert Jim, who had been skeptical of the partnership from the beginning, raised his hand. Chairwoman, you have shown us that it is possible to change hearts while protecting our interests. Our ancestors would be proud of what you have accomplished. As the meeting concluded and people began to leave, Sarah remained in her seat, reflecting on the complexity of leadership in the modern world. She had spent months negotiating contract terms and development agreements, but the most important work had been the patient, difficult task of helping people see past their assumptions and prejudices. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Maria, the new receptionist at Morrison & Associates. Ms. Blackhawk, I wanted you to know that we had a visitor today who was initially treated with less respect than she deserved. But several of us remembered your words about dignity and assumptions, and we were able to correct course quickly. Thank you for the ongoing education. Sarah smiled and typed back, thank you for being willing to learn and to change. That's all any of us can do. As she drove home through the reservation, past the houses where people lived and worked and raised their children, past the community center where elders taught traditional crafts and young people learned their history, past the school where the next generation was being prepared to face the challenges and opportunities of the future, Sarah felt the deep satisfaction of work well done. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to advocate for her people's rights and interests. There would be other meetings, other negotiations, other moments when she would have to prove her worth to people who couldn't see past their assumptions. But tonight, she was content to know that she had helped create something lasting. Not just a business partnership or a development project, but a new understanding of what was possible when people chose to see each other as full human beings worthy of respect and consideration. The Riverside Partnership Agreement would stand as a monument to economic cooperation and cultural preservation. But the real monument was invisible, built in the hearts and minds of everyone who had learned that dignity was not something to be earned, but something to be recognized, that authority came in many forms, and that wisdom often appeared in unexpected packages. And somewhere in the city, in the marble lobby of a prestigious law firm, the lessons of that autumn day continued to ripple outward, changing one interaction at a time, one assumption at a time, one moment of recognition at a time.